welcome back to the TRANQUILI-TEASE. I'm your host Marina Mars, and today's episode is inspired by another inquiry from the audience. Today I discuss what it means to think about your diet in terms of all of the things that you consume in a day, whether that's food, media, air quality, social connection, or marketplace interaction. Another thing I'd like to discuss is how these things factor into our general life satisfaction. Now, before we dive in, please be sure to click the subscribe button followed by the little bell for notifications if you're on YouTube, or if you're tuning in from another podcast streaming site, go ahead and click that follow button. That way I can ensure that you get the content you need when you need it. Now, when you Google the definition of diet, we're given a bouquet of options to view it from. We're given a total of 5. So the first one is just food and drink, right? Food and drink regularly provided or consumed. This is not a holistic definition at all whatsoever. But the second one says habitual nourishment. And I love this one the most. That phrase is just so delicious. So this is the lens that I'm going to be using for the rest of the episode. That being said, let's move through the other definitions. So the third one is the kind and amount of food prescribed for a person or animal for a special reason. So I like the intentionality behind this one in the sense that diet is an intentional thing. However, sometimes it's not. So I feel like this leaves a lot of room, a lot of pieces of information out, as well as the fact that, again, it's only about food. So moving into the fourth definition, it says a regimen of eating and drinking sparingly as to reduce one's weight. This whole one is just entirely problematic and clearly extraordinarily American, so we're just going to throw that one in the big dumpster fire outside. And moving on to the fifth one, something provided or experienced repeatedly. So in terms of a sentence example, I heard a steady diet of excuses, right? So this one, again, is very interesting and holistic, and I really like it because it's not necessarily just about food. I think it's also really interesting to note that when I did Google diet, like the definition of diet, I was bombarded with a full page of advertisements on, how to lose more weight, how you're just not good enough as you are, and how your diet and what you're doing, like you're putting shit in your body and making all of these assumptions about my life. And it was ridiculous, right? So I had to go to the second page of search results just to find the definition, even though I literally Googled the definition of diet. Y'all, I Google definitions of words like 3 to 5 times per day. The definition is usually one of the first search results, whether you put the word definition there or not. That being said, this wasn't completely unexpected. Again, I am based in the United States. This doesn't come as a surprise to me that the internet wants to make me feel bad about myself, because how does Google make money? Advertisements. But that being said, there's no greater sign to me that this episode needs to be written. That all being said, the intention of this episode is to simply give some vocabulary and context to our actions, right? There are no right or wrong answers here. There are no specific implementation strategies that I'm going to try to shove down your throat. What I'm about to lay out is just kind of like the paradigm in which I view what I consume personally, and how I've found that some other people find it pretty helpful. Other people don't. To each their own. Here we go. Please, share your thoughts in the YouTube comment section anytime you feel inspired to add your spice into this melting pot of love. I'm very open to hearing what you find helpful, harmful, interesting, or confusing. So let's dive in. What is a diet of all senses? Like I mentioned, I love that definition of habitual nourishment. That being said, habitual, meaning we're not talking about the one-off situations. We're not talking about those very special little treats, those desserts, if you will. We want to talk about what we consume with each sense, right? So what does it mean to take the world in holistically? So this includes everything that we come in contact with, every voice we hear, every sight we see, every sound we hear, like everything we eat, every Facebook post we read, right? Everything is connected. So considering the multivariable impact of our daily micro decisions can make a substantial difference over time. Just so cool. Like our bodies and minds are just processing centers. We fundamentally change at a cellular level, every single time something enters our body, not just food. This is excellent news because that means if we start implementing tiny, small shifts one at a time until they become more automatic, we can shift the entire trajectory of our lives. The power comes from small moments that we have total control over. So let's talk about the lifestyle of a holistic diet. So we've got 4 main aspects that I specifically like to focus on. So we've got ingesting, savoring, nourishing, and reflecting. The first stage being ingesting, right? So we are accepting the holistic material. So you can't just pick up a piece of pie and be like, I want all of the flavor, but none of the sugar. Just like you can't pick up a book and be like, I want the happy ending without the struggle. Our ecosystems will also be holistically affected, right? Did you know that half our weight isn't even ours, like just ours? Like, we carry around an entire microbiome inside of us, and technically on the outside too. You've got a whole little society inside of you, and again outside of you, to take care of. They are sensitive. These little bacteria of all different kinds, they're sensitive just like you. They have likes, they have dislikes. In fact, your favorite food may actually be the favorite food of your microbiome in your stomach or in your mouth or just in your general digestive system. That's how powerful these little creatures are. They talk with our body, they talk with our neurons, they talk. But, you know, that's another concept that I really want to dive into on another day more specifically, so we're going to move forward. What we ingest also affects the world outside of you, so not just inside of you and not just on you. Have you ever noticed your speech change whenever you've been around someone with a contrasting personality? Or maybe your energy shifts as you progress through a conversation with someone. That's still part of your diet. You're still ingesting something from the outside world, and also you are giving out a product that others are ingesting themselves, right? So we must recognize that for the input that we add into our system, there will be an output. This output will affect you as a person. It'll affect your inner microbiome, just like as a collective, and it'll affect the world outside of you. Which brings us to our second phase of a diet, which is the savoring aspect, right? So this is when we allow the nutrients of, the practice to settle in, or the food as we move forward. So this is when the pie is being ripped to shreds by your little belly army, so to speak, right? You can still taste the remnants of the chocolate on your lips, and you're either instantly completely satisfied or just you want to vomit. This is where the initial short-term effects of the diet begin to take hold. So, if you're taking in a piece of art or you're watching a performance, this is where your knee-jerk reactions would be coming from, right? So if you're in person watching something happening, this is maybe where you're cheering or clapping. That's you savoring the performance that you just took in. If you're on a digital platform, maybe you left a heart or a comment, or a little reaction, a little emoji. That's exactly what I'm talking about as well. So now, whether or not you're enjoying yourself is a completely separate story. I like these positive examples because they're easy, but I'll give you a tougher one since this stage is much more about your body and your mind's present reaction to the ingestion of whatever it is that is in your diet and being consumed. So from a negative standpoint, this could be where you just finished reading a book and you're super sad that it's over. Or maybe you reread the final page a couple times just to be sure that it was the end of the meal, so to speak, right? Or you're scraping your plate. You're licking the very last bits off of your fork. So then we move into the third part of the digestive process of the diet, right? So we are into nourishing. And now this is when we're getting feedback from our bodies / our microbiomes, right? Our little collective society inside of us. And this is where we receive the information whether or not we should be repeating this aspect of our diet, if we're listening closely. So think of this as maybe 10 hours or 10 days or 10 weeks after you've, quote, ingested something. This is the stage where there's been enough time to have moved on from savoring, so you're not living as specifically present with the object in which you've consumed. And digestion is kind of now in the background. If it's food, it's in the small intestines. If it's a thought, it's in the subconscious mind. Now that you've had a moment to step away, your dreams or your stream of conscious may have some artifacts of whatever it is that you digested. So these are still going to be like a little bit like the knee-jerk reactions, more so than, full, complete thoughts. But they may become just like a little bit more abstract, a little bit harder to get a read on. For example, have you ever seen a painting that showed up in your dreams? Right, so it didn't just happen, you didn't just see the painting, time has passed, but now out of nowhere, for whatever reason, maybe it's symbolic, maybe, you just can't get it out of your mind and you don't know why, that would be this stage. That would be the ingestion, or the nourishing, excuse me. So maybe you're still low on energy because you're digesting a very dense meal, right? And you feel sluggish even though your stomach is clear. These are all examples, and what I really want to make clear is that this is a very automatic and very deeply hidden process. In fact, of the entire life cycle of your diet, this is what's hidden mostly in the shadows. So if you have a pain point in life that you can't easily, you just can't quite grasp it, this is where I personally would allow my intuition to start sifting through information. And why is that? Well, because the offending material is still within me, right? But it hasn't quite left. So I still have the ability to communicate with it or take notes on the effects before it moves into the exiting stage of the process, right? So food moves right through us, but everything else, this is kind of where it gets stuck sometimes. This is where your trauma nestles itself. So how do we get our bodies to release that which no longer serves it? By moving into the next stage, which is reflecting. So this is stage 4 of the life cycle of diet. So in reflecting, this is kind of where you take what you need and you leave what you don't. In other words, everybody poops. So obviously if you're talking about food, we're talking about poop. And if we're talking about, if you want to be a little bit more self-aware about it, right, you may examine it. After all, it's like the only universal language that you have between, the whole self and the microbiome of you. Think of poop basically as your body's State of the Union address, right? It's trying to communicate with you. There's so much information in there, just if you've never taken a look before, talk to your doctor about it. They have a lot of really good advice. But the point of the story is take this a little bit more metaphorically, right? If we're holding tension from the digestive process, this is where we want to wring it out of our body, or so to speak, you want to squeeze it in order to release. If we need to release a thought, this is where we need to meditate in order to let it go. So we're taking that thing that was in the dark depths, that was buried beneath the surface, that was hanging out in the subconscious, we're taking it out of there, and before it completely just disappears from our, ability to process it, we take it and we face it. And we go, I want to observe this, and then let it go and be free of it. If it feels like I just, asked a bunch of questions about ingestion, savoring, nourishing, and reflecting here, or maybe I just did nothing but give examples, it's because I'd like to invite you to shift your perspective on how you view yourself specifically. So, obviously I painted with some very broad strokes, but that's where I ask you to get creative. Oftentimes I think people think that human beings are these like impenetrable meat sacks. Like the only way in and out is through like 4 to 6 holes total, depending, right? Like, well, yes, these bodies are pretty good at pushing things away that it doesn't like. I'm telling you right now, it isn't due to the lack of holes, right? Like technically we've got thousands of holes. Like, so it may not be wise to think of ourselves as this like sealable water bottle, right? We're more like sponges with armies of thousands of like little warriors constantly, working through the networks and the passageways. Whenever I say things like there's a whole universe inside of you, like I'm not trying to be cute, like there's a whole society in there. So it's easy to see how this relates to physical outcomes, right? Obviously, the way that our bodies look, or the way our bodies feel, or the way our bodies handle endurance, these are all really obvious physical outcomes of diet. And I'll give you one more holistic example because I believe all the other dominoes will fall and kind of make sense for you afterwards. So I switched to a fully vegan diet as of July of 2019. I quit alcohol and cigarettes by October of 2019. And this started to make my thoughts louder and more clear, which at first felt very chaotic, because that's kind of what happens, right? When you purge all of these like built up toxins, things are going to get really loud before they get quiet again. This also started a new phase of my life where I stopped numbing myself to things, right? With the lack of alcohol, by numbing, I mean, I would physically drink and I would mentally disassociate, but I shit you not, all of my senses like started to get better when I began building boundaries between myself and numbing agents of any kind, right? Whether they were physically ingestible or not. So then a few months later, with all of these more heightened senses, thoughts started connecting at higher levels. So I had to start switching my media diet. Certain types of content were really starting to get to me. And at first I thought it was because I was like becoming too sensitive, and I was getting weaker. But then I realized like, oh shit, no, like that was just my mind and body like telling me that it used to be super clogged up. And what I was using before was basically equivalent to a dull knife. And nowadays I'm a damn machete. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that like my diet is perfect, but what I am trying to say is there was a very big difference. And at first it made me feel crazy because when you start having thoughts and you start seeing things that you never used to see or think or hear, and all of these dots start connecting, you're just, it can be a bit much. But that clarity that arose from being aware of my diet and being very, very intentional, it's the reason I'm still here and my podcast hasn't died. It's how I was able to start a business. It's how my partnership is thriving in the middle of a pandemic when others, people are fighting. And I owe so much of my success and my happiness and my path towards becoming healthier, mentally speaking. A lot of it comes from the way that I view diet. In episode 14 of the TRANQUILI-TEASE, that episode is titled Mental Hygiene, Overcoming Intrusive Thoughts and Behaviors. I talk through the process of cognitive behavioral therapy, or in other words, I give you the tools to be able to rewire any thought or habit that you may want to shift. As you look at your diet, I ask you, I implore you to ask yourself, if you are what you ingest, what are you? Make a list of everything you've ingested today, right? Food, media, smells, sights, conversations, meetings, schedules, all of it. And then ask yourself, is this how I want to be represented? Tell me about your experience with habitual nourishment and diet. Head on down to the YouTube comment section and tell us all about it. Do not be shy. On a final note, if you haven't already signed up for my newsletter, the Martian Gazette, I highly recommend it because it is a free sporadic dose of love, beauty, and pleasure. For more information, check out the description or head on over to marinamars.com if you're tuning in from another streaming site. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Until next time, my loves, XOXO.